I'm Eric Morehead, Vice President and Senior Compliance Counsel for NYSE Governance Services. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Inside Compliance. I'm very pleased to be joined by Wesley Bizzell, who serves as the Assistant General Counsel, External Affairs for Altria Client Services Inc. He provides in-house legal counsel on matters relating to the political, legislative, and lobbying activities of the Altria Group. In this role, he's responsible for ensuring that the company complies with all laws and regulations regarding federal, state, local, and international campaign finance. That's a lot. And government ethics, gifts to government officials, lobbying, disclosure and reporting, and charitable giving. He's lectured on this topic in many venues across the country. He's co-chair of the Conference Board Committee on Corporate Political Spending, and he is a faculty member for the Practicing Law Institute's annual Corporate Political Activities Conference. Wes, I'm very pleased to have you here to talk on this important issue having to do with political activity. For many of our viewers out there who do not keep up with some of the changes in the law, we know that there have been some significant Supreme Court decisions, for example, in the last few years. What are some key changes in the last few years for those that are not as attuned to this as you might be to be apprised of in the compliance arena?
Sure. On the corporate level, the large change was a case in the Supreme Court called Citizens United, which allowed companies and unions and nonprofits to use corporate funds for engaging in political activity at the federal level. So they can now take out an ad using these funds and be for or against a particular candidate. And that has spawned what we call super PACs. And so has been a lot of fundraising in this area. Typically, corporations haven't gotten involved in this at the federal level, but it is something that is continuing to change, continuing to emerge, and without a doubt, companies are probably being solicited for these types of contributions.
And for those companies and practitioners, whether in the General Counsel's office or in compliance out there, that are overseeing the political activities of their organization, you lecture on this pretty extensively and talk to a lot of companies. What are 2 or 3 kind of main pitfalls that you see companies running into in this arena?
One of the things, especially as it relates to campaign finance or corporate political giving, is just not clearly vetting the organization to which you're giving. A lot of the states, about half of the states, allow direct corporate political contributions, but giving money to third parties who then support candidates is fairly new, certainly at the federal level with Citizens United and in a number of states as well. And so these organizations, these super PACs, can arise very suddenly. They are formed. They may only last through an election cycle. So they have a different risk priority than what a company has. So giving funding to one of those types of entities, one of those super PACs, may not align with the values that your company has. And the funding may be used for something that's much more aggressive than what you would want your name associated with.
And in fact, I think we've seen some reputational issues that have come out of giving that probably some corporate givers had no idea would happen when they made the original gift.
Exactly. So it's important to sort of dig a little deeper, look into the organization, have an understanding of why it's been formed, who it might be supporting, what types of candidates it might be supporting, for instance, and what types of activities it's going to engage in. Because in some states, you are going to be disclosed as a donor to that organization, and in a fewer number of states, your corporate name might appear on the ad itself as having helped pay for that ad. That's
probably something that some organizations don't plan for when they're considering their giving.
Exactly.
Another aspect I think that is probably important to some of our viewers out there who don't have as much experience with this as perhaps you and other organizations have, is putting together a policy. When you're putting together a political activities policy, what are some key components that you would look for a really well-made best practices policy?
First, I think you have to assess your risks. You have to see in what types of activities your organization engages in. Do you sell materials or products to a government? Are you heavily regulated by a government entity? Do you have a lobbying organization at the federal, state, or local level? Or even if you don't have a formal lobbying organization, do you have employees maybe at your local plants and your local home offices who interact with government officials? So once you have that information, you can sort of assess and see how deep you need to dig on a couple of issues in your policy. Your policy certainly, no matter what, should address gifts to government officials, and making sure that when you give a gift, there is some type of approval process. Someone looks at that gift, preferably before it's been given, because a lot of these states have limits on the gifts that government officials can receive. And those limits may be extremely small. Iowa, for example, if you're a regulated entity, you can spend no more than $3 a day on a gift to a government official. Other states like Virginia have no limits, and that's changing now with a change in the statute. But there are now still a handful of states that, going forward, will not have limits on gifts to government officials.
So it sounds like there's such a patchwork out there that it's important to have some sort of, you said, a pre-approval or vetting. You
really do need to have a process in place and sort of really a point person where it comes to. Because you're right, I mean, the laws are complex. The gift laws typically have a number of exceptions to them. And so, trying to figure out what applies and what doesn't apply can be difficult, and really shouldn't be left to the employee who is, trying to figure out whether they can take this city council member to lunch or not.
Well, it sounds like, at least in Iowa, a cup of coffee is probably the extent.
A very small cup of coffee.
There you go. Another area that probably quite a few of our viewers are going to be interested in, because again, they're implementing the compliance programs in their organizations, is training and communicating around these issues. Obviously, talking about political contributions can be a touchy subject. What are some strategies that you've seen that have been successful in communicating and training around these issues?
I think you have to first understand that people come to this issue with some preconceived notions. They may have a preconceived notion of what a type of activity is. So, from a legal perspective, I may say political contribution, and an employee may think, well, that's when I write a check and give it to a candidate. But it can mean much more than that. And so I think what you have to do in training is to be very specific and provide a lot of examples as to the types of activities that are covered. And it really needs to be engaging. I mean, this is an area of law that I appreciate it very much, and I focus my career on. But I realize that not everyone finds as fascinating as I do. And so you really need to reach the audience in some form or fashion. And we have done that with your organization and the Real Biz Shorts work as well, to really speak to an issue and have people understand it in a fun but educational type of way.
I think another key here point that you just made that is true across the board with any kind of dry topic, not to
no offense taken,
is approaching it from different perspectives, whether that's humor, shorter communication bursts rather than lengthy discussions. Those are things that I think are effective across the board, no matter what the subject is. But it sounds like that's been effective in your communication around this topic.
It certainly has, and I think you also have to reassure employees. Like you said, this can be a sensitive topic. People don't want to feel like their employer is dictating what types of activities they can engage in. And so, at the base level, and this would apply to most companies unless probably you're a government contractor, is you have to reassure employees that they can engage in their personal political activities, just making sure they do it on their own time and with their own resources, not using company funds for it. And once you sort of set that base level, I think you can build off of it and then sort of layer on the requirements as well. But you oftentimes do run into that sensitivity because you're in this area mixing not only sort of a person's personal life and their corporate employee life, but you're throwing politics in there as well. And that, that always can be a touchy subject for folks.
Sure, absolutely. One last question before we let you go. What are some emerging trends you see in this area of the law? What are some things for folks to keep keep track of here in the near future?
After Citizens United, in sort of the wake of Citizens United, what we've seen is a lot of angst about corporate involvement in political activity. And there has been, in some states, but certainly not all, an increased effort for disclosure of who's giving money to these entities. And in some states, that, given the control or the makeup of the legislature, that's not being enacted into law. And so what a group of folks have done is they've turned to the shareholder proposal process and are engaging with companies in this area through shareholder proposals that would require a company to disclose either its political activities, its lobbying activities, the amount of funds it spends for each, its trade association memberships. And so we've seen a significant rise in the past 4 or 5 years in the number of those proposals. I mean, I think there's 50 proposals on the lobbying side this year, a little over 50 on the disclosure of political contributions. And so it can really, I think, for a company that's not prepared, it can sort of hit them from left field, where all of a sudden they get this proposal and they obviously need to respond to it, but may not have a program in place that sort of addresses the really underlying reason for that the proposal was submitted in the first place.
I guess the takeaway there is be prepared.
Be prepared. It may come to your doorstep soon.
Well, thanks, Wes. Can't thank you enough for sharing some insight around this touchy issue.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you again for watching this episode of Inside Compliance. We'll have another one for you soon.